Good luck, bro.
Is everything good?
Yep, you're live.
All right. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read Aloud with Mr. Jordan. We're going to give a few more minutes before we begin. I hope everyone's doing well at home. Everyone's staying safe inside with their families. Today's story is called Richard Wright and the Library Card. This was written by William Miller and illustrated by Gregory Christie. Richard loved the sound of words. He loved the stories his mother told about the farm where she grew up. There was a willow tree by a bend in the river, she explained. I dreamed all my girl dreams down there. Richard loved to hear his grandfather tell about the war, how he ran away from his master and fought the rebel army. I was only a boy, his grandmother said proudly. But I fought as well as any man. I fought in the rain and in the mud. I carried the flag at the head of the troops. And this is him talking to his grandfather. Richard longed to read stories on his own, but his family was very poor. They moved often, looking for work in different towns and cities. His father cleaned office buildings. His mother cooked in the kitchens of wealthy white people. Richard had little chance to go to school. His mother taught him when she could, reading the funny papers out loud, sounding each word carefully. As you see, this is him and his mother and her reading the funny papers to him. When Richard finally learned to read, he couldn't buy or borrow books he wanted so badly. Books were expensive. The doors of the library were shut against him because he was Black. So Richard read whatever he could find. Old newspapers, books without covers pulled from ash cans. When Richard was 17, he caught a bus to Memphis. He hoped he'd find work, earn enough money to move to Chicago, where he would make a new life for himself in the North. At this time, the North was where most people who were free lived. Richard walked the hot streets looking for a job that would be his ticket to freedom. He saw many young men like himself searching for the same job, the same way out. He finally found a place in an optician's office. He polished eyeglasses, swept floors, and ran errands for white men. As long as he kept his head down, as long as he began every sentence with "sir," Richard was safe. This is him working away. At night, Richard returned to the boarding house where he had rented a room. To save money, he ate beans from the can, warmed by water from the tap. Listening to the noise of the street below his window, Richard felt a familiar hunger for words. There were thousands of books in the public library, but only white people could get a card and could take them out. But Richard had an idea. At work, he looked around the office, trying to find one man who might understand his hunger for books. Who else has that hunger for books? Love to read so much. For the most part, they were like so many other white men he'd known before. They would never understand a Black boy who wanted a library card, a Black boy who wanted to read books they even didn't read. One man seemed different from the others. Jim Fogg. He kept to himself. And the other men ignored him, as they ignored Richard. Several times, Richard had been sent to the library to check out books for him. One day, when the other men were out to lunch, Jim was eating alone at his desk, so Richard approached him. I need your help, Richard said. Are you in some kind of trouble? Jim asked with a suspicious look. I want to read books. I want to use the library, but I can't get a card, Richard said, hoping Jim would not laugh in his face. What do you want to read? Jim asked cautiously. Novels, plays, history? He wanted to read it all. Richard felt confused. His mind was racing so fast, he couldn't think of a single book. Jim said nothing, but reached into his desk and brought out a worn white card, and he handed it to Richard. How will you use it? Jim asked. I'll write a note, Richard said, like those ones you wrote when I got books for you. All right, Jim said nervously, but don't tell anyone else. I don't want to get into trouble. No, sir, Richard promised. I'll be careful. After work, Richard walked through the crowded streets to the library. He felt as if he were on a train to Chicago, as if he were traveling north already. But when Richard walked through the door, he felt the odd fear again. Many heads were raised at the sight of a black boy in the library. Richard kept his eyes down, not looking up until he stood at the checkout desk. The librarian put on her glasses to make sure she wasn't seeing things. Richard handed her a note he had written and stepped back. Why can't Mr. Fogg get his own books? She asked sharply. He's very busy, Richard replied, his legs trembling. All right, the woman said, but you tell Mr. Fogg I'd see him in person next time. Richard roamed the stacks, unable to believe there were as many books in the world. He touched the leather spines and fingered the pages as he dreamed about for such a long time. Look at all the books in the library. This were a place where he belonged. Are you sure these books aren't for you? The librarian asked in a loud voice when he came to check them out. Once again, heads turned and Richard felt the eyes of white people on him. He thought he had been caught, that he would never be able to read the books he wanted so badly. But Richard told the lady what she wanted to hear, what she believed was true about all black boys like him. No, ma'am, he said. These books aren't for me. Heck, I can't even read. The librarian laughed out loud and stamped his books. Richard heard other people laugh as he walked out the door as well. I wonder how that made him feel. That night in his room, Richard read until the sun dimmed the electric light. He read the words of Dickens, Tolstoy, and Stephen Crane. He read about people who had suffered as he had, even though their skin was white. They longed for the same freedom Richard had spent his life trying to find. With the light of the sun coming through the window, Richard put the book down. He felt sleepy, but the words he had read echoed in his ears, colored everything he saw. He wondered if he would act differently if others would see how the books had changed him. Richard knew he would never be the same again. This is him staying up to the morning, reading endless books. That morning, he carried his books to work in the newspaper. Whenever he had a chance, whenever the office was empty for a moment, he read. Mr. Fogg walked over, pretending that he was asking Richard to go and pick up the laundry for him. What'd you get? He asked. under his breath. Richard opened the newspaper and showed him. Jim seemed shocked at first, but then a smile came over his face. Those are powerful books, Richard, he said. Those books will stay with you for the rest of your life. But for now, he said, looking around the office, you should keep them to yourself. That's Mr. Fogg approaching Richard as he's reading. Richard tried to do just that. But as the time for the journey north came closer, he didn't care who saw him reading. The men in the office either laughed at him or asked him if he was crazy. What's a colored boy like you toting a bag full of books around for? Your head can't hold all them big words? Every now and then, Jim smiled at him from across the room. The library books had changed some of Richard's feelings about white people. Richard still feared them, but he understood them better. The day he left for Chicago, Richard stopped by Mr. Fogg's desk. Thank you, Richard said. Thank you for the books. Thank you for everything. Jim didn't say a word, but he shook Richard's hand in front of everybody. That was a big deal back then. Like, why is this white man shaking this black man's hand? What must be so important about it? On the train going north, flying across the open fields, Richard remembered the books he had read. The words came back to him. The stories more real than the train itself. Every page was a ticket to freedom, to the place where he could always be free. This is him on the train. And that's the end. In this story, his ticket to freedom was literacy. And literacy is such a ticket to freedom because no one can take it from you. You're able to obtain as much knowledge as you want. And Richard used this library card to obtain all the knowledge he needed for his journey to Chicago. So when you get the chance, check out a library card and get all the knowledge that you need for whatever your journey is. Please comment if you have any questions. Please let me know how you like the book. It's one of my favorites. And tune in next time. Thank you.